You don't need permission to write your book. Do you have a piece of paper and a pen? Start writing. Do you have a computer and an idea? Start writing. Do you have access to a library with a computer? Start writing. Whose permission are you waiting for? A parent, a spouse, a teacher, an agent? If you're seeking permission from one person, you have to realize there are 100 others who wouldn't approve. So, what do? You write your book. Write about aliens and giant squids and undiscovered planets. Write your wacky, otherworld, salamander, fairy, whodunit story. Write your book. In his book, Zen and the Art of Writing, my favorite creative person ever, Ray Bradbury, says, I have never listened to anyone who criticized my taste in space travel, sideshows, or gorillas. When this occurs, I pack up my dinosaurs and leave the room. Don't listen to people who say you can't do it, or worse, that you shouldn't do it. Start today. There are books that only you can write. I firmly believe that. And if someone gave the same writing prompt to me and you, even the same outline, we would write two very different books, both great in their own way. Think about all the books that were never written because the authors thought writing books were only for certain kinds of people. That won't do. The world needs your book because there are books inside of you that only you can write. So, silence those voices of doubt in your head, sit down, and write. I have a very specific answer when people ask me how writing is going, but it wasn't always that way. When I first started writing and people would ask how writing is going, I would say good or pretty good. I even replied a few times with okay. All of these answers were met with the same response. Insert polite smile. People don't care about the day-to-day grind of writing. That part isn't exciting or glamorous, though it does make up about 90% of the writing life. But they don't want to know if you're having trouble with character motivations or if the words aren't coming. They're just being nice, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But when I read the book Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, it changed my answer to that question. There's a chapter about work for work's sake, about doing work, and it stayed with me. He says, this is why we can't let externals determine whether something was worth it or not. It's on us. The world is, after all, indifferent to what we humans want. If we persist in wanting and needing, we are simply setting ourselves up for resentment or worse. Doing the work is enough. Doing the work is enough. I try to live by that because I really do love the work. I love the outlining and the drafting and the editing. I love the work, and I really want to keep the mindset that doing the work is enough. So now, when someone asks me how writing is going, I reply with, I'm having a blast. I love the work. I still just get the polite smile, but at least now I'm being honest. If you're like me, you've probably got a story idea for a huge space opera with different civilizations and eras and magic systems and, of course, time travel. But let me tell you the best advice I received when I started writing fiction. Don't write that book. Yes, the best writing advice I ever received is don't write. It came from my friend Lance Schaubert, and he wasn't talking to me specifically. I think I read it on his blog, and we weren't even friends yet, but it resonated with me. His advice wasn't to never write that book. The full advice was to not start my writing career with a story that big. He said to start with something small. So I did, and he was right. Enter The Rose Weapon. This was way back in 2016, and I had written a handful of short stories and was ready to try my hand at something a little bit longer. And so, for my first book, I decided to write a small, familiar story, adding my own twist to it, and using the tried and true hero's journey outline. And by doing this, I made sure that there was never more than two people in the scene at the same time. I had a hard enough time trying to figure out how to write dialogue between two people that trying to balance a group conversation would have been impossible for me. If I would have started my writing career with trying to write that big space saga time travel fantasy story with all the characters and locations and plots and subplots and side plots, I would have never finished it. I would have gotten discouraged, and more than just the regular levels of discouragement that an author gets when writing a book, and I would have never finished. But I did finish. I stuck to an outline and wrote a short, 30,000 word novella about a dragon that attacks a Viking village every 10 years and a young, soon-to-be chief who has to deal with it. The goal of the first book wasn't to tell a story that would blow everyone's mind with its originality. The goal was to learn what it felt like to write a book, to finish a book, period. So, shelf that space saga, pick one of your simpler story ideas, and write a book you can finish in the next 12 months. I love the feeling of having a well-defined goal, complete with a due date and a detailed expectation of the task at hand. Throw in a few subtasks to help me track my progress, and I'm all yours. So naturally, January makes me giddy. Around the beginning of the year, I spend a lot of time scouting around the huge atlas that is the upcoming year and placing pushpins where I want to finish projects. The problem is, I hardly feel motivated to finish a project in October that I resoluted in January, that is, if I can even remember the project. So in 2018, I changed how I approach yearly goals. I learned a new method from my friend and fellow author Luke Condor, and he talks about just going 3 months at a time, setting quarterly goals, and trying to bust your butt to reach them. The idea behind the quarterly goals is to make smaller, attainable goals to keep momentum going and to avoid apathy and burnout from having goals that are too big to handle. For example, publish my novel in 2025 is a massive goal with a ton of sub-goals. It's easy to get discouraged because there are no wins along the way. Instead, set a more attainable goal like finish the first draft by March 31st. Don't even think about editing or beta readers or publishing or anything during those 3 months. The only thing that exists for you is finishing your first draft by March 31st. And I like to write my goals down and print them out and put them somewhere that I can see it every day and I can remember this is the only thing that exists right now. You might be surprised how much you can accomplish in just 3 months. I recently read K.M. Weiland's book, Creating Character Arcs, and the book is full of practical tips and explanations on different types of character arcs, and I highly recommend it. But there was one part that stood out to me the most: creating the characteristic moment. She defines the characteristic moment as an opening scene where the audience first meets the protagonist, and from their actions, we learn a ton of things about them. Here are a few things she lists as goals for the characteristic moment to achieve. Introduce your protagonist. Probably reveal your protagonist's name. Indicate your protagonist's gender, age, nationality, and possibly their occupation. Indicate important physical characteristics. Indicate their role in the story. Demonstrate the prevailing aspect of their personality. Hook readers' sympathy and/or their interest. Show the protagonist's scene goal. Indicate the protagonist's story goal. That being said, don't treat this as a checklist. Every story is different. You might not want to reveal your protagonist's age or gender right away because it plays into the story. I'm reading a book right now where the main character's name is a big deal and it's not revealed right away. I do think hooking reader sympathy and/or interest and showing the protagonist's scene goal is a must. If you can hint at the protagonist's story goal as well, that'll hook your readers even more. Don't think of these as separate things you need to achieve. When you demonstrate the prevailing aspect of your main character's personality, there's a good chance you'll also be hooking reader sympathy and revealing some of the character's backstory or motivation all at the same time. Just remember, the characteristic moment is a scene where your audience will get their first impression of your character. It's one of the most important scenes in your book. So, take your time crafting a memorable scene that convinces your readers to invest in your character. For examples of characteristic moments done well and a full explanation of the characteristic moment, make sure to check out K.M. Weiland's blog post in the description. And for a deep dive into creating character arcs, check out her book, Creating Character Arcs. Naming characters is one of the most difficult parts of the entire novel writing process. It's also one of the most important. When you name your character, you can finally stop writing the placeholder, insert main character name. But more than that, it helps your character become a real person in your mind. I prefer to have the names of my characters, at least my main ones, before I even start drafting. But how do you find a name that your character will like? Well, here are 3 ways that I do it. Make up names based on things in your world. Admittedly, this works better in science fiction and fantasy books, but the principle still applies. For instance, the main character in my book, Sparrow in the Stream, has a name that's a play on a phrase in a different language that relates to her character motivation. It's a fun little Easter egg. The second way is to make a variation of a common name or word. In the book The Wild Robot, the robot's name is Rosm, which comes from Rosm's Universal Robots, a play from 1920 where the word robot was first used. Bringing it closer to home, I wrote a story where the characters are alien otter people and the husband's name is Mustellet, and it's a play on Mustelidae, the family classification where otters fall. The third way is to use a name generator or some other AI. And I've done this before when I was at a standstill. Just Google sci-fi name generator or futuristic name generator and you'll find some good ones. Admittedly, this is my least favorite options, but sometimes you do just get stuck. At the very least, I would suggest tweaking these AI generated names so that they're still your own. And all that to say, put in the time thinking about the perfect name for your characters. You won't regret it. And when your readers comment on how much they love so-and-so, you'll be thankful you spent the extra time finding the perfect name. If you're working on your first book, odds are you've also been daydreaming about getting your book published, reaching the New York Times bestseller list, traveling the country, signing books, and making millions of dollars. And maybe they'll even build a theme park around your mouse knight who defeats the orc eagles. But unless you have clearly defined success early in your career, you won't know when you've actually achieved it, which can lead to always striving for more and never being satisfied. Here's what I mean. Your main goal might be to have your book rank number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Or your main goal might be to have a book available that your friends and family can purchase and read. Both of these goals are completely worthy and legitimate, but you can see how they both require 2 different paths to achieve them. To hit the New York Times bestseller list, you need a blockbuster concept with a unique spin, you need a complete polished manuscript, you need to find an agent to represent you, you need your agent to sell your manuscript to a publisher, and you need to sell a lot of books. And the other route, to have your book available that your friends and family can purchase and read, you need a complete and polished manuscript formatted for print, you need a beautiful cover, and a print/distribution platform where you can independently publish. 2 different routes, but still 2 authors finding success. You define what success is when it comes to writing your book. For me, I've landed on 3 things that define writing success. Honor God with my books, write the books I want to write, and replace my current salary with writing income. Notice that making money is a goal, but I put an actual number on it. It's not just an endless hamster wheel trying to make more. Also notice that getting good reviews isn't on my list either. So when a bad review comes in, or someone calls one of my stories a big nothing, true story, even though it hurts, it's easier to shake it off and keep going. So spend some time thinking of how you define success as an author, and then make a plan to reach those goals. I mentioned this in other videos, but there's one piece of writing advice that stands above the rest. Have fun. One of the reasons I love Ray Bradbury is because of this quote that I read very early on. He says, "If you are writing without zest, without gusto, without love, without fun, you're only half a writer." Starting out, I didn't want to be half a writer, and writing stories that I love with passion and zest and fun sounded like a much better approach. So please, whatever you do, don't start writing just for the money. Yes, there are fiction authors that you've never heard of, and I'm thinking of indie authors specifically, who make 6 figures a year, who churn out books because the more books that you have, the more books people have to buy, which equals more money for you. But I'm in those writing groups online, and I see a lot of them, and I'm not saying all of them, but I do see a lot of them talking about writing the books, but not loving the books that they've written. And yes, I hear you saying, but making oodles of money from my books would be fun. And of course it would. For a while. until your audience demands that you write book 12 in a series that you loathe, and you've bought all the shiny new toys and you no longer wake up and rush to the keyboard. If you're an author, you're playing the long game. It takes a long time to write a book, but the book will last even longer. If someone picks up one of your books long after you're dead and gone, you want them to still feel that magic, the passion, and the excitement. And the only way for that to happen is if it was written with passion, excitement, and a little bit of magic. I think the only way to do that comes down to one simple rule: have fun. Until next time, jump, build, fly.